The NFL free agent negotiation window opens today, and the Chicago Bears have a lot of work to do. Ryan Poles has plenty of needs to fill on his roster, and there are plenty of pitfalls he needs to avoid in free agency.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1, and you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we look at what is ahead for the Bears in free agency. Needs to be filled so that they can go into the draft with a pure ability to take best player available. The Bears also needing to avoid any lingering ambiguity or question marks and just solidify these positions. Don't leave it up to a competition where we're not sure exactly who's going to end up playing where and how. Just get everything squared away. There's no more patience. There's no more excusing it. This time, business has to get done. But also, the Bears need to make sure they go through this free agent period and not also mess it up. Like, you need to be active, but not too active, but not underactive either. And that's sort of the dangerous game we're going to try and land here, like down the bowling alley without bumpers on the side, to figure out kind of where the Bears can fall through here, because everyone is bracing for this free agent period in particular to feature some extra overspending compared to previous years. And it's mostly a reflection of, an increase in the salary cap, although it's not a drastic increase in the salary cap. It's not like it's something we weren't expecting, but it's a combination of a healthy salary cap increase and then also a disappointing level of talent in free agency that then will feel even more overpaid by comparison. So, right, it's like sometimes you have a really big name player hits free agency and then gets a massive contract, and it's like, wow, the money is coming out, but that's what you would expect when a top flight pass rusher or a top flight wide receiver, whoever it is, hits free agency. That's when the big contracts come out, and it's like, oh wow, the prices are going up, but at least they're going up for really good players. This year, it's a much thinner feeling free agent group, and there's not necessarily the same caliber of player that you feel like, wow, they should really be resetting the market with how big of a contract you give to, Buccaneers wide receiver Chris Godwin. Very good player, but is he going to be the highest paid wide receiver in football? No, but as these deals start to come out, these numbers could end up being higher than we expect them to be. And so if I'm the Chicago Bears, I'm Ryan Poles. We know Poles likes to avoid the overspending as is, won't get into these bidding wars, or will get into bidding wars and then get out of bidding wars. We've seen them go after high-priced players in the past and then ultimately opt not to sign them and let them sign with other teams on these big contracts, like Draymond Jones or Javon Hargrave on the defensive line a couple years ago. Both guys now salary cap casualties for their team, and Ryan Poles looks smart for being prudent on those type of negotiations. You have to avoid the overspending, but it's hard to then get good big-name players for your team without overspending. And I think about this with the pursuit of Atlanta Falcons center Drew Dalman, who we're all fully expecting will be a Chicago Bear. Maybe by the time you listen to this, the Bears will have already agreed to terms with Drew Dalman. I'm half expecting this will be quick out of the gate. It's a fairly poorly kept secret here. But he's the number one center in the free agent market. So how much does that end up mean for paying him? Because you need to get a good center, right? But you don't want to completely break the bank and overpay way more for a player that's very good, but not top of the league level player in Drew Dalman. He's had a really solid career for Atlanta, but he's never made a Pro Bowl. It's not the perfect measurement, but it kind of gives you a sense of where he is. And he's in the Hall of Very Good, but never been an elite difference-making, game-changing player at his position either. And so, how much do you pay for that? Because he's going to come out and salary cap's going up. He's the number one center in the market. He's going to get a big contract and probably more than you're going to want to pay him. Like, you look around, Creed Humphrey just got a big contract extension to be the highest paid center in the NFL from the Kansas City Chiefs. And that made him, he's getting paid $18 million a year. And he's clearly now like way ahead of like Frank Ragnow of the Lions is at $13.5 million. Lloyd Cushenberry from the Titans is at $12.5 million. Ryan Kelly from the Colts was making just under $12.5 million. And Eric McCoy of the Saints was 12. Like centers used to be $12, $13 million. Humphrey just bumped that up to $18 million. Dalman is certainly not getting $18 million, but he's probably looking at this group and saying, I'm getting at least 14. If Ragnow's getting 13.5, I should be at least the second highest paid center in football, I would think. So the starting there is 14. The range is between 14 and 18 seems to be where this could end up. And of course, guaranteed money becomes a part of this conversation. But is Drew Dalman worth $14 million a year? I mean, on paper, probably not. Is he going to be the second best center in football if you sign him to the second most expensive center contract? Probably not. But that's the nature of free agency. You have to overpay for players that get that far. And I would rather overpay for a center that's going to cost me, say, $14 million a year, as opposed to overpaying for another player at another position that might cost you $20 or $25 million a year, like a big-time pass rusher or like some of the big-time guards we're getting talked about $20+ million a year. I'd rather overpay at 14 than overpay at 20 or 25 because you can get by with overpaying at 14. It's a little bit easier of a bill to pay on your contract and on your salary cap. So I'm on board with paying Drew Dalman. It's going to cost more than we think it will, and a lot of these offensive linemen are going to end up raising these contracts up higher. So if I'm Ryan Poles and I'm the Bears, what you got to do is be very targeted, get in, sign your guy right away, and then get out. That to me is the most financially responsible way here, because the way this ends up working in free agency is that, first contract gets signed, then the next people who are looking to sign a contract to the same position in the same area, like, well, he just got that, so then I should be able to get more than this. There's an advantage to being first, to getting the deal done early, so that you're not negotiating against all the other players who are also signing contracts, and if they sign another contract, like if Tevin Jenkins signs for $18 million a year, is Drew Dalman going to look at that and say, hey, wait a minute, I should probably be getting closer to 18 million. You know what I mean? Like, is there can be a ripple effect there. So if I'm Ryan Poles, I go into this saying, I know exactly who I want, and I'm going to sign them right away. And I'm going to pressure to get this deal done in the first couple hours of free agency so that the price tag doesn't go up based on how other people's contracts are signed. Make your splash right away, then back off. Then wait for the big contracts to go through. Everybody's going to blow their big loads of money on the big contracts, and then you can kind of come into that second wave of free agency. All the guys that didn't get those big deals that are in that second and third tier, then they're going to be a lot cheaper because all the teams with the salary cap space are going to spend big money on the first guys. Then there's not going to be as much cap space to go around, so now we got a bargain bin shop a little bit more, and that's when you can find better deals in that second wave. So if I'm Ryan Poles, it's splash right away, then be patient and aim lower from there. Now that could be that could be Drew Dalman and Khalil Mack right away, and then back down from there. But like you don't want to grab Drew Dalman right away and then wait 2 days and then try and sign a defensive lineman, because after those 2 days, guys are going to be signing contracts, and Chase Young is going to get more than we think he's going to get, and Deo Odengbo is going to get more than we think he's going to get, and Josh Sweat's going to get more. Like these numbers are going to keep building up. Where all of a sudden, the guy you wanted initially ends up getting out of your price tag, and if you don't secure at the price you want right away, the numbers are just going to get a little bit high and a little bit out of control for Ryan Poles. So avoid overspending, make your splash quickly, and then from there you can be a little bit more responsible financially with second wave, second tier style of free agency there. That's how I want to see Ryan Poles approach this from the start. Overall, though, free agency has to be used to set them up in the best position in the draft. And that's by filling these needs so that you don't have to be feeling like you're drafting specific positions in the draft. So we'll look at how Ryan Poles needs to approach filling these Bears roster needs ahead of the draft next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting and wondering and worrying if you were going to get any money back, and then waiting, wondering, and worrying some more. But now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible, file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. All so you can get the most money back, guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in iOS mobile app. See guarantee details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. The big picture progress Ryan Poles needs to make in free agency is securing your roster holes so that you don't go into the NFL draft feeling like, man, I have to get a player at X position. I have to make sure I find my starting center in the draft because, oh, shoot, I didn't get one in free agency. Or I have to find my starting defensive end in the draft because, oh, no, I didn't get one in free agency. Because that's where you fall into trouble especially, in the first couple of rounds of the draft where you say, I'm going to take this player because he's a starting caliber player at that position, not because he's truly the best player on the draft board. And that's what scares me a little bit here. Like those are clearly kind of the two big spots, right? Center and defensive end. But the needs certainly go well beyond that. And it's not as though Ryan Poles has to fill, all 53 of his roster spots. But the key here is that you need to get every position to the point where you can honestly look at the roster and say, at any given position and say, if we go through the draft and we don't take a player at this position, we will be okay for this year, specifically for this year. There are always going to be positions that, hey, we need to get a player in here for the long term, and you can prioritize drafting that position. But at least for 2025, you don't want to be in a spot where we have to take a player at that spot in order for this roster to be successful this season. And that's the kind of flexibility they need to create in free agency. And there's a lot of different holes Ryan Poles has to fill. Because when you look at this Bears roster right now, as I'm recording this on Sunday right before the start of free agency, free agent negotiating on Monday, currently the Bears have over 20 of their own free agents from this season unsigned that are going to start negotiating with other teams and maybe still the Bears, on Monday as this podcast comes out. 20 players off of the 53, over 20 off of the 53-man roster from last season is like 40% of your 53-man roster is unsigned and able to go negotiate with other teams. That's going to mean significant turnover on this Bears roster. Not very many starters, right? The only starters that are not coming back are the interior offensive lineman and a defensive end. You basically got 18 out of 22 starters coming back. So it's not as though it's going to be like a drastically different starting lineup, but a lot of the depth on your team are still free agents. You have 4 different wide receivers entering free agency. You've got 6 different offensive linemen entering free agency, a couple of tight ends, a couple of running backs, 3 or 4 defensive linemen, a couple of linebackers, a couple of cornerbacks, a couple of safeties. Like those are all, a lot of those can be backup positions, but all of a sudden it adds up to 40% of your 53-man roster, in addition to, right, the other 37 that make up your 90-man offseason roster. Like the Bears have a lot of work to do. They don't have that many players in total under contract. I mean, they do, but there's going to be a lot more they still need to add to this roster. And so when I think about what Ryan Poles needs to be able to knock out in free agency, right? Starting center for sure, some sort of starting caliber defensive end. It's not that you can't still add at these positions in the draft, but you don't want to go in the draft needing to get those guys. You need to get something at a number 3 wide receiver spot. It's not just Tyler Scott at this point. You need to sign a wide receiver in free agency. You need to get backups on your defensive line. You've got a couple of backups at those spots, but you need upgrades. It's not so much a numbers game as it is a quality game. You've got Austin Booker and Dominic Robinson and Daniel Hardy under contract as backup defensive ends, but you should have at least one more better backup defensive end than just Booker and Dominic Robinson. Those are, there's a lot to like about Austin Booker, but is he going to be your number 3 defensive end this season? I would like to aim higher than that. Same thing at defensive tackle, where you've got, Dexter and Billings and Pickens, and they re-signed Chris Williams, or they tendered Chris Williams, and they brought back Jonathan Ford. Like, they have bodies on the defensive line, but it's a talent question more than a numbers question. Yes, they don't need to sign a defensive lineman right now to fill the 53 backup defensive lineman to fill the 53-man roster. They need the starter, but backups, it's more about, can you get a better number 3 edge rusher so that Austin Booker becomes your number 4, Dominic Robinson becomes your number 5, Daniel Hardy's your number 6. And same thing at defensive tackle. Can you get a better backup defensive tackle so that, Chris Williams is your number 5 and Jonathan Ford's your number 6, instead of trying to rely on guys that weren't great last season and counting on them to try and be something better or more this season. And so that's where it becomes a priority for me to upgrade that, ideally in free agency, so you don't go into the draft saying, hey, we need to get a better defensive tackle or another better defensive end, because we already addressed that with the open market. Then it's about filling more depth, right? You still need a backup guard, still need another backup tackle. Ideally, Ryan Bates is going to be either your backup center or one of your backup guards, but you're going to need more interior offensive line depth. You're going to need depth at linebacker. If you're going to let Jack Sanborn go, you need to find some kind of replacement. Who's going to start in base defense next to TJ Edwards and Tremaine Edmonds? Is it Noah Sewell? Is it Eamon Ogbongbemiga? Or do you still need to go out and get somebody else? You have 4 linebackers under contract right now. You're going to need at least 5, if not 6, on your 53-man roster when the regular season comes around. They got to add something there. And can you count on getting a linebacker in the draft? I mean, maybe in the late rounds, but you're not using one of your first 4 picks on a linebacker in theory. So, that's something you have to address in free agency. Same with cornerback depth. Like, you're not going to draft a corner in the first or second round this year. But right now you got 5 guys or so under contract. Like, you're going to need more bodies at that cornerback spot. It's cheap bodies, but still things that need to be accomplished in free agency. You still need another tight end. You still need a 3rd string running back. You got to find an option for kick returner and long snapper. Like, this is a lot of things that Ryan Poles needs to address, and it's going to be a lot of turnover then on this Bears roster. But if you can go through free agency and fill most of this, right? I just want to get to the point where every position is, I'm okay if I don't draft anyone there. And as with a lot of these spots, you sign all these players, and then you can draft another player there. It's not as though, we have too many wide receivers, so we're not going to draft one, or anything like that. Like, no, any of these spots you can add more players as rookies. You just don't want to be forced to, so that you can sit there on the clock in the first round and in the second round and third round and say, who is the best player available on our draft board? Because we're just going to take who we think the best possible prospect is, almost regardless of position. Like, okay, you're not going to draft a quarterback, at least not early in the draft. So you're not going to, if a quarterback's your best player available in the first round, like if Shedeur Sanders falls, obviously you're not going to do that. But like, you want to be in the position where you can take a running back if you want to. You can take an offensive or a defensive lineman if you want to. You can take a cornerback if you really want to. If it's the best player available, and you're not sure if Tyreek Stevenson's your long-term guy, like maybe that becomes a part of that conversation, but only if you give yourself that luxury and that flexibility based on how you fill all the other needs on the Bears roster. And that's really priority number 1 then for Ryan Poles. Don't overspend to do it, but then also make sure you fill everything. The other thing I want to see the Bears accomplish in free agency, though, is specifically how he goes about filling those needs. Because there are, I think we've seen Ryan Poles not always be super deliberate and definitive, and there's ways to say this position is taken care of, and there's ways to say, well, we threw some stuff there and we're going to see what happens. And I don't want to see the Bears leave these lingering question marks of not just like, yes, you want to get bodies there, but like let's solve some of these holes definitively and not leave things up for grabs. So we'll kind of take a look at where we don't want to just see, a competition to see who's going to be the player there, versus where maybe it's a little bit safer to say, okay, that's okay because it's not as important and you like the young guys that you've got at those spots. We'll kind of take a look at what needs to be addressed more thoroughly and what can be addressed more lightly next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Because right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. You can pick all of your favorite underdogs. You can ride with the favorites. You can back them with spreads and totals and game props. And with tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on in the FanDuel app that's safe, simple, easy to use. And when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com, get your $200 in bonus bets, and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Ryan Poles needs to address these key Bears needs, but I want to see specific, consistent, deliberate addressing of those needs, because it's felt like too often in the last handful of off seasons, the Bears will kind of piecemeal a need together and leave it so it's like, well, we threw 2 or 3 different bodies at a position and see what we're addressing it. But you don't really, if none of those players that you throw at the position end up being any good, then you didn't really solve the need. You just sort of temporarily patched over it so you could realize later it would still end up being a problem for this roster. I think back to just this past offseason when we wanted to see the Bears do more to address the offensive line, and the plan at center was trade a 5th-round pick for Ryan Bates from the Bills. Okay, maybe there's some upside there, but he's been a backup, so let's see what else Ryan Poles does at center. Okay, you signed Coleman Shelton as a free agent from the Rams. Okay, he's been a starter, or maybe a average to below average starter, but a starter. And we were all sold on this idea. The idea was sold to us, I should say, not that we bought it, but the idea was sold to us that you've got 2 quality centers, and they were going to go to OTAs and minicamp and training camp, and they're going to compete, and the competition is going to make them both better, and whoever wins that competition is therefore then going to be a quality starting center for the Bears. And we found that Ryan Bates kind of won the competition through the summer, but then gets to training camp, but he gets hurt, so then Coleman Shelton goes in, and you end up starting your second choice at center for pretty much the entire season, and he was okay. Not the worst center in football, but now we're all clearly looking to see the team upgrade that position. And it's like, well, he addressed the center position, but he addressed it poorly. And maybe that's the distinction I need to make here. Don't just fill the needs, but fill them well. And obviously, easier said than done. He's always trying to fill them well. But I just get tired of we're going to make it a competition for a starting job and see who rises to the top. If it's one thing, you're always having competition for backup spots. Who's going to play on special teams? There's guys competing there. Who's going to be your top backup rotational player? That's where I'm totally fine with get 2 or 3 guys and have them duke it out to see who's going to really win that spot. Who's going to be the number 3 running back? You can, sign a couple of guys there or whatever and draft a late round pick or whatever and have a competition. That's fine because it's the number 3 running back. If that position doesn't turn out to be very good, that's okay. It's not going to hurt your team. But when it's your starting center, that's a lot more of a consequence when your moves, that the competition you try and create doesn't pan out. And I don't want to see Ryan Poles take the same approach, let's say even at center again this offseason, where you've got Ryan Bates still under contract. I mean, in theory, if they wanted to, they could either re-sign Coleman Shelton and run the whole competition back, or, more likely somebody who's just a different version of a Coleman Shelton caliber center, right? I think about it's not a super strong free agent class in terms of the center group after Drew Dalman, but if you want to look for a cheaper center like Evan Brown from the Arizona Cardinals, who played for Ben Johnson with the Lions and has kind of been, fairly mediocre, I would say, over the course of his career, like Liam Eichenberg from the Dolphins, or Bradley Bozeman from the Chargers, or Nick Gates from the Eagles, although I think he's a restricted free agent now that I think about it. But these are guys where it's they're compete with Ryan Bates and maybe the competition produces a center, but I really want to come out of this with a guy you can just feel really good about. That doesn't mean it has to be Drew Dalman from the Falcons, but Ryan Kelly from the Colts, or I don't love Josh Myers from the Packers, but like even that I would feel better about than some of those other names we already talked about. Like I want to get through this process and say, no question, this is who the starting center is. Not a competition, not a we'll see who wins in training camp. This is who the starting center is. Same thing at defensive end, right? Like you cut DeMarcus Walker, you sure as hell better replace him with a true starting caliber player and not like some competition where we're going to re-sign Darrell Taylor and then you're going to sign Marcus Davenport, who's been hurt the last couple seasons with the Lions and the Saints, and then kind of have them compete to see who's going to be the starting defensive end opposite Montez Sweat. Like it feels like we've done this, right? With DeMarcus Walker, and then they sign Yannick Ngakoue, and we spend all offseason wondering, like, are the Bears going to do more at pass rusher? Are they going to sign another pass rusher? Or are they just going to have these guys compete that they've got under contract? Like, just get it squared away. Same thing at number 3 wide receiver. I'll even throw that in here. Like, you got Tyler Scott. You could go out and sign a veteran minimum number 3 wide receiver and say, Tyler Scott and this veteran are going to, Mecole Hardman are going to compete to see who's going to be the number 3. Or just go get a number 3 wide receiver. Doesn't have to be Keenan Allen. Doesn't have to be $20 million, but just like go get somebody who's clearly better than everything else you got. So it's not some competition where we got to figure out who's going to emerge as the better player. Like if it's a key position that matters, center, defensive end, number 3 receiver, maybe even those defensive tackle rotational guys, like make it a clear upgrade. I'll even throw left tackle in there. Either upgrade from Braxton Jones and go get a big left tackle or don't. But like, don't give me like a middle of the line left tackle where Braxton Jones and this middle tier free agent. I haven't even looked that much at the left tackle market, like off the top of my head. Like Andrews Pete coming back from the Raiders. Like, I don't know, Andre Dillard. Like, don't go sign a mediocre left tackle and say these two guys are going to compete. Either get a clear better upgrade than Braxton Jones or just roll with Braxton Jones and Crown Amagaji, like with what you got. But don't give me this like, oh, competition is going to bring the best out of these guys stuff. Solidify these positions. Don't leave the question marks. Don't leave the doubt. Make these important spots whole so that, again, you can go into the draft and draft the best player available. And you can feel like, boy, this roster is set. And your entire starting lineup can play together from OTAs to minicamp to training camp. And the only thing that can get in your way then is injuries. But not this like, well, we spent all offseason rotating in wide receivers. We spent all offseason rotating in centers. So Caleb Williams never got to really work with a guy for the consistent portion of the whole time. Like, enough of that. Like, this Bears team is beyond that point. That works when you're tearing down the roster and trying to turn over a bunch of positions. And you have so many needs, you can't fill them all at once. Not anymore. We need like 3 big things and then a bunch of small things. Get the big things all squared away. You can have competitions for offensive line depth and linebacker depth. That's fine. Competition to see who's going to be the backup guard. Great. That's perfectly fine with me. That's better for team building strategy, but not starters, not key critical positions. Then you can go in the draft and say, I want to draft offensive linemen. I want to draft pass rushers, but I don't have to draft them. I want to, and it's ideally if you can in the first few rounds, but it's not the end of the world if you go through the draft and don't get those guys. That's where the Bears need to be as Ryan Poles takes them through free agency. The free agent signings are going to come fast and furious. On Monday, as this podcast comes out, on Wednesday, as the signings become official. So we're going to try and keep up with it as best we can here on Locked On Bears. We may even throw out some bonus podcasts during the week if the Bears make big moves as well. So make sure then you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. So if you want more free agent coverage from across the league, check out Locked On NFL for analysis on all of the biggest free agent signings on every single team. It comes out twice a day, once in the morning with Tyler Rowland, and then you go in the barbershop in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, although Tony just had surgery last week, so I don't know if he's co-hosting this week or not. But anyway, it's still going to come out twice a day. Still going to have all of your free agent coverage taken care of. We'll get all your Bears stuff here on Locked On Bears, and I hope that no matter who the Bears sign, that you'll still be able to find another opportunity to bear down.